The Forgotten Hero. The alien marketplace was alive with a cacophony of sounds and colors. Merchants of countless species peddled their wares, shimmering crystals that sang when touched, steaming bowls of alien cuisine, and trinkets from distant corners of the galaxy. Fyeah strolled through the bustling crowd, her hood drawn low to conceal her features. Her violet skin, marked with faint luminescent patterns, was rare in these parts, and she had no desire to attract attention. But today, Fyeah's focus wasn't on the vibrant market stalls or the alluring scents drifting through the air. Her sharp hearing had picked up a name she hadn't heard in years. Captain Eli Carter, the gruff merchant was saying to a customer. The old human soldier. Heard he's still kicking around. Some say he's on that forsaken outpost near the Drelvian belt. Fyeah froze mid-step. Her heart raced as the memories flooded back. The chaos of her homeworld under attack, the screams of her people, and the moment a towering human soldier stood between her and death. Captain Eli Carter. The name was etched into her mind, tied to that desperate day when he had risked everything to save her and a group of terrified civilians. The merchant's voice pulled her back to the present. Haven't seen him in years. They say he's gone hermit, doesn't want anything to do with the galaxy anymore. Fyeah's hands clenched at her sides. Could it really be him? Could the man who had changed the course of her life still be alive? She didn't realize she'd been staring until the merchant turned to her. Something you need, miss? He asked, his tone gruff but curious. Fyeah shook her head quickly and hurried away, her thoughts swirling. If Captain Carter was alive, she had to find him. For years, she had wondered what had become of him. After he'd saved her, she never got the chance to thank him. More than that, she wanted answers. Why had he risked himself for her? Why had a human soldier, with no reason to care for an alien girl from a distant planet, chosen to stay behind and fight when he could have escaped? She found herself wandering to a quieter corner of the marketplace, her mind made up. She would search for him. The galaxy was vast and dangerous, but she owed him a debt she could never repay. She couldn't explain it, but something deep inside told her this was a journey she had to undertake. Her first step was finding transportation to the Drelvian belt. It was a lawless region, avoided by most traders and travelers, but she knew it wouldn't be impossible. She approached a grizzled pilot lounging near his ship, a half-finished bottle of some pungent liquid in his hand. I need passage to the Drelvian belt, she said, her voice steady despite the nervous flutter in her chest. The pilot looked her up and down, his reptilian eyes narrowing. That's no place for someone like you. What business you got there? That's my concern, Fyeah replied firmly, her luminescent markings flaring slightly, a sign of her determination. The pilot snorted. It'll cost you. Fyeah handed over a small pouch of credits, her remaining savings. The pilot examined the contents and gave a toothy grin. All right, little miss. Hope you're ready for a rough ride. As the ship lifted off, Fyeah stared out at the expanse of stars, her thoughts heavy with anticipation. She didn't know what she would find at the end of this journey. Was Captain Carter really alive? Would he remember her? And if he did, would he be the same man who had once been her hero? Her reverie was interrupted by a warning light flashing on the console. The pilot cursed under his breath. Pirates, he growled. Strap in, girl. This might get messy. Fyeah's heart sank as she looked out the viewport to see 3 sleek ships closing in on them. The journey to find her hero had barely begun, and already the galaxy was reminding her how dangerous it could be. She gripped the armrests of her seat, determination hardening her resolve. No matter what happened, she wouldn't turn back. Not now. Not ever. A journey through shadows. The cold emptiness of space loomed large as the small transport ship raced toward the Drelvian belt. Fyeah sat tensely in her seat, her eyes fixed on the 3 pirate ships closing in on them. The pilot, a grizzled reptilian alien named Rin, barked orders at the onboard AI while twisting the controls with surprising dexterity. Hold on tight. Rin shouted as the ship dove into a nearby asteroid field, weaving between massive, spinning rocks. Fyeah clutched the armrests, her heart pounding. The ship jolted violently as a blast from one of the pirate ships grazed their shields. "Are you sure this is the best plan?" she shouted over the alarms blaring through the cockpit. "Unless you want to be their next cargo haul, I'd say it's our only plan." Rin snapped, his hands flying across the controls. Another blast rocked the ship, sending Fyeah tumbling from her seat. She scrambled to her feet and rushed to the cockpit. "What can I do to help?" Rin gave her a sharp look before gesturing to a nearby console. "Divert all power to the rear shields and engines. If we can outrun them, we'll have a chance." Fyeah's fingers danced over the unfamiliar controls, her mind racing as she followed his instructions. A high-pitched whine filled the air as the engines roared to life, propelling them forward at breakneck speed. The pirates weren't giving up. Their ships were faster, more agile, and equipped with weapons far superior to the outdated transport Fyeah had hired. Each passing second brought them closer. Suddenly, the ship's AI announced in a calm monotone, "Incoming boarding party. Breach detected on Deck 3. Rin swore loudly. "They've latched onto us. We're not shaking them off now." He reached under his seat and pulled out a blaster, tossing it to Fyeah. "You know how to use one of these." Fyeah hesitated, her grip uncertain as she held the weapon. "Not exactly." "Well, you're about to learn," Rin growled, already moving toward the back of the ship. The sounds of cutting torches and clanging metal echoed through the corridors as the pirates forced their way inside. Fyeah's breath quickened. She hadn't expected her journey to be easy, but she hadn't anticipated a life-or-death battle this soon. Rin motioned for her to follow, taking up a defensive position near the airlock. When the door burst open, chaos erupted. Alien pirates swarmed into the ship, their weapons blazing. Rin fired with deadly precision, his shots taking down the first wave. Fyeah ducked behind a crate, her hands shaking as she raised the blaster. One of the pirates spotted her and charged, a wicked blade in hand. She squeezed the trigger, and a bright bolt of energy struck the attacker square in the chest. He crumpled to the ground, and Fyeah stared in shock, her mind struggling to process what she'd just done. "Keep moving," Rin barked, dragging her to her feet. The battle raged on, but the pirates' numbers were overwhelming. Rin was hit, a blast grazing his shoulder, and he fell back with a pained grunt. Fyeah rushed to his side, dragging him into a narrow maintenance tunnel. "We can't win this," Rin gasped, clutching his wound. "But we can still get you out of here." "What are you talking about?" Fyeah asked, her voice rising with panic. Rin pressed a button on his wrist, and a small compartment opened to reveal a portable beacon. "This will send a distress signal. If anyone's out there, they'll find you. But you have to go now." "I'm not leaving you," Fyeah protested. "You don't have a choice," Rin said firmly. "They're after cargo, not passengers. If you stay, they'll use you as leverage or worse." Reluctantly, Fyeah took the beacon and slipped into the maintenance hatch Rin pointed to. She crawled through the narrow space, the sounds of battle fading as she put distance between herself and the pirates. When she finally emerged, she found herself on the surface of a barren moon. The thin atmosphere was barely breathable, and the icy wind bit at her skin. She activated the beacon, its signal pulsing faintly in the darkness. Hours passed, and Fyeah began to lose hope. She shivered as the cold seeped into her bones, her mind drifting to Captain Eli Carter. She had risked everything to find him, and now she was stranded, with no idea if the beacon's signal would reach anyone at all. Just as despair began to take hold, a distant roar broke the silence. A ship was approaching, its silhouette dark against the starlit sky. Fyeah's heart leaped with a mix of hope and fear. Was this her salvation, or yet another threat? The ship landed, its ramp descending slowly. A figure stepped out, shrouded in shadow. Fyeah's breath caught as the figure spoke, his voice gruff but familiar. "Well, well, What's an alien girl like you doing on a moon like this? Yila's journey to find Captain Eli Carter had only just begun, and already the galaxy was testing her resolve. The outpost. The ship's ramp lowered with a hiss of hydraulics, and Lila's heart pounded as the figure emerged, his face obscured by a hood. He moved with the confidence of someone who had seen more battles than most beings lived through, his boots crunching against the icy ground. The man stopped a few paces from her and tilted his head. "I'd ask if you were in trouble, but it's written all over your face," he said, his voice rough but oddly steady. Yila blinked, unsure whether to feel relief or caution. I was stranded. Pirates attacked my transport." The man didn't reply immediately. Instead, he glanced at the beacon in her hand. "Where'd you get that?" "A pilot gave it to me before." Yila trailed off, the memory of Rin's sacrifice still fresh. The man sighed and gestured toward his ship. "Come on, before those pirates find you again." Without waiting for her response, he turned and walked up the ramp. Hesitant, but with no other choice, Yila followed him. The interior of the ship was Spartan but functional, its walls lined with tools, weapons, and worn furniture. The man motioned for her to sit while he busied himself at the cockpit. "You didn't answer my question," he said, his back to her as he adjusted the ship's controls. "What's a girl like you doing in a place like this?" Yila hesitated. How could she explain her quest without sounding desperate or foolish? "I'm looking for someone," she said finally. "A man who saved my life years ago." The man paused, his fingers hovering over the controls. "A lot of people have saved a lot of lives," he said, his tone neutral. "What makes this one so special?" "He's a human," Yila replied, her voice firmer now. "A soldier, Captain Eli Carter." For a moment, the only sound was the hum of the ship's engines. The man turned slowly, pulling back his hood to reveal a face weathered by time and conflict. His gray-streaked hair framed sharp eyes that seemed to see straight through her. "You're looking at him," he said. Yila's breath caught. This was him, the man who had risked everything to protect her. But he wasn't as she had imagined. The heroic figure from her memories had been replaced by someone older, hardened, and weary. "You're Eli Carter?" she asked, barely able to believe it. He nodded, leaning back against the console. "I was, a long time ago. What do you want from me?" "I wanted to thank you," she said, standing, "for what you did on Narvalis. You saved my life, and many others." Eli's jaw tightened, and he looked away. "That was years ago, ancient history. Not for me," Yila said, stepping closer. "I've carried that moment with me every day. You gave me hope when I thought there was none." Eli shook his head, a bitter smile tugging at his lips. "You don't know what you're talking about. What happened on Narvalis wasn't heroism. It was a mistake." "A mistake?" Yila echoed, stunned. "I stayed when I should have left," Eli said, his voice rising. "I broke orders, got half my squad killed. And for what? A few survivors who don't even remember my name." "I remember," Yila said softly. "And so do the others you saved." Eli turned away, running a hand through his hair. "You shouldn't have come here. There's nothing left for you, or anyone else." Before Yila could respond, an alarm blared through the ship. Eli's head snapped up, and he rushed to the cockpit. "We've got company." Yila followed him, her heart racing as the ship's sensors displayed 3 approaching vessels. Pirates. They'd tracked her beacon. Eli muttered a curse and began flipping switches. "Strap in. This is gonna get rough." Yila hesitated. "You're not going to fight them." Eli shot her a sharp look. "This isn't a war, kid. It's survival." The ship roared to life, lifting off the moon's surface as the pirate vessels closed in. Yila gripped her seat, her eyes fixed on Eli as he piloted the ship with practiced ease. For all his reluctance, the man who had saved her years ago was still in there. She could see it in the way he moved, the way he calculated their next move. The chase was intense, with the pirates firing relentlessly as Eli weaved through asteroid fields and debris. Isla couldn't help but feel a mix of fear and awe. This was the man who had once stood between her and death, and despite his claims, he was still fighting to protect her. When they finally shook the pirates, Eli let out a heavy sigh and leaned back in his seat. "We're not safe yet," he said. "They'll come back, and they won't stop until they've got what they want." "What do we do?" Hila asked. Eli turned to her, his expression grim. "We make them regret coming after us." For the first time, Hila saw a spark of the hero she remembered, buried beneath years of pain and regret. And in that moment, she knew she had made the right choice to find him. The journey wasn't over. It was only just beginning. Old wounds, new threats. The small ship drifted in the shadow of a massive asteroid, its engines silent to avoid detection. Inside, Hila and Eli Carter prepared for what felt like an inevitable confrontation. The dim lighting of the cockpit cast shadows across Hila's face, deepening the lines of age and battle weariness. "They'll find us eventually," Eli said, breaking the heavy silence. His voice was low and calm, but there was an edge of resolve. Pirates don't give up on easy prey. Hila stood near the console, watching as Eli tinkered with a battered rifle he had retrieved from a hidden compartment. "Easy prey. You outmaneuvered them back there," she said, a hint of admiration in her tone. Eli glanced at her, a faint smirk crossing his face. "That was luck. Luck runs out." Hila shifted uncomfortably, the weight of his words pressing down on her. She hesitated before asking the question that had been burning in her mind. "Why do they want you so badly?" Eli paused, his hand stilling over the rifle. "They're not after me," he admitted. "They're after what I know." "What do you mean?" Eli pressed. Eli sighed, setting the rifle down and running a hand through his hair. "After Narvalis, I didn't just disappear to avoid the guilt. I uncovered something, plans, coordinates, weapons caches belonging to a syndicate that has its claws in every dark corner of the galaxy. They don't like loose ends." Hila's eyes widened. "You've been hiding from them all this time." "Hiding," Eli said with a bitter laugh. "Surviving. Every time I think I'm out of their reach, they find me again. That beacon you activated, it might as well have painted a target on my back." Hila's heart sank. She hadn't meant to put him in danger, but now she realized her quest to find him had done exactly that. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I didn't know." Eli waved her apology away. "What's done is done. Now we deal with it." A sudden beeping on the console drew their attention. Eli leaned over, his expression darkening. "They're scanning the area. Won't be long before they find us." Eli swallowed hard. "What do we do?" Eli's fingers flew over the controls as he pulled up a schematic of a nearby asteroid base. "We draw them in. They're expecting a scared pilot and a stranded girl. Let's give them a fight instead." The pirates arrived within minutes, their sleek ships circling the asteroid field like vultures. From her position near the ship's airlock, Hila could hear the hum of their engines and the sharp metallic clang of docking clamps. Eli handed her a smaller blaster, his gaze steady. "Stay close to me. If things go south, you run. Got it?" Hila nodded, gripping the weapon tightly. Despite her fear, there was a determination in her eyes. She wasn't the same helpless girl Eli had saved all those years ago. The airlock hissed open, and the pirates stormed in, their weapons raised. Eli moved like a force of nature, his rifle firing with deadly precision. Hila stayed behind him, taking careful shots when she could. The confined space of the ship worked to their advantage, forcing the pirates to come at them in smaller numbers. But the pirates were relentless. They pressed forward, their leader, a towering alien with jagged armor, barking orders in a guttural language. Eli's movements grew slower, the weight of years and fatigue catching up to him. Hila noticed and stepped forward, firing a well-placed shot that sent one of the attackers sprawling. Eli glanced back at her, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. "Not bad," he muttered. The tide turned when Eli activated a trap he had rigged earlier. Explosive charges detonated, sealing off key passages and forcing the pirates to retreat. The leader snarled in frustration but barked in order, and the remaining pirates fell back to their ships. "They'll regroup," Eli said as the last of them disappeared. "We bought time, but not much." Eli sat down heavily, her hands trembling as the adrenaline wore off. "How do you live like this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Eli didn't answer immediately. He leaned against the wall, his gaze distant. "You don't live. You survive." The weight of his words hung in the air, and Eli felt a pang of guilt. She had come here hoping to find a hero, but what she found was a man burdened by years of sacrifice and pain. Before she could say anything, the ship's comms crackled to life. A distorted voice spoke, its tone filled with malice. "You can't run forever, Carter. We'll find you. And the girl." Eli slammed his fist against the console, his expression grim. "They've got our location. It's only a matter of time." "What now?" Eli asked, her voice trembling. Eli turned to her, his eyes blazing with determination. "We take the fight to them. If they want me so badly, let's make sure they regret it." For the first time, Eli saw a spark of hope. Hope that the man who had once saved her still had some fight left in him. Together, they prepared for what would be the most dangerous battle of their lives. The past resurfaces. Eli piloted the ship toward the syndicate's stronghold with a grim determination, his fingers tight on the controls. Fyeah sat beside him, watching the looming asteroid base grow larger in the viewport. The base was massive, bristling with turrets and patrolling ships. It was a fortress, designed to keep intruders out and its dark secrets buried. "You've done this before, right?" Fyeah asked, her voice tinged with nervous humor. Eli gave a humorless chuckle. "Not like this, but there's a first time for everything." Eli glanced at him, noting the tension in his jaw. She knew this wasn't just another mission for him. It was personal. The syndicate had been chasing him for years, and now he was bringing the fight to them. As they approached, Eli activated a series of countermeasures, jamming the base's sensors and masking their ship's signature. "We'll have a small window to get inside before they realize we're here," he explained. Fyeah nodded, clutching the blaster Eli had given her. "What are we looking for?" "The syndicate's central database," Eli said. "It'll have everything. Locations of their operations, their leaders, and their plans. If we can get that, we can cripple them." "And what happens after that?" Fyeah asked. Eli didn't answer. His silence was enough to tell her that he didn't expect to make it out alive. The ship slipped through the base's defenses, docking in a shadowy hangar bay. Eli powered down the engines and turned to Fyeah. "Stay close to me, and don't hesitate to shoot if you have to." "I won't," she said, her voice steady despite the fear churning in her stomach. The corridors of the base were cold and sterile, illuminated by flickering lights. Eli moved with practiced stealth, his weapon at the ready. Fyeah followed, her senses on high alert. The faint hum of machinery and the occasional echo of footsteps were the only sounds. They reached the central control room without incident, but the moment Eli began accessing the database, alarms blared throughout the base. "Looks like they noticed us," Eli muttered, his fingers flying over the console. "I just need a few more minutes." Fyeah positioned herself near the doorway, her blaster aimed down the corridor. The sound of boots pounding against the metal floor grew louder, and she felt her heart race. When the first wave of syndicate guards appeared, she fired, her shots precise and controlled. The guards fell, but more took their place. Eli continued working, his focus unwavering despite the chaos around them. "I'm almost there," he shouted over the gunfire. Fyeah ducked behind cover as a barrage of energy bolts whizzed past her. She returned fire, her confidence growing with each shot. She wasn't the scared girl Eli had saved years ago. She was fighting back, standing her ground. Finally, Eli let out a triumphant shout. "Got it. Everything's downloaded." Before they could celebrate, The sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the corridor. A massive figure stepped into view, the syndicate leader. He was an imposing alien, his armor gleaming and his weapon crackling with energy. "You've been a thorn in my side for far too long, Carter," the leader growled. "It ends here." Eli raised his weapon, his gaze hard. "Funny. I was about to say the same thing." The fight was brutal. The syndicate leader was a skilled combatant, and Eli struggled to keep up. Fyeah fired at the guards that flanked him, but their numbers seemed endless. Just when it seemed they would be overwhelmed, Eli activated a hidden explosive he had planted earlier. The blast shook the entire base, sending debris raining down and giving them a momentary advantage. "Time to go," Eli shouted, grabbing Fyeah's arm and pulling her toward the hangar. They raced through the crumbling corridors, the alarms now accompanied by the screech of tearing metal. The base was collapsing, but the syndicate leader wasn't giving up. He pursued them, his weapon firing relentlessly. As they reached the ship, Fyeah turned and fired a final shot, hitting the leader square in the chest. He staggered but didn't fall, his enraged roar echoing through the hangar as Eli and Fyeah boarded the ship. The engines roared to life, and they blasted out of the base just as it exploded in a brilliant burst of light. The syndicate's stronghold was destroyed, and with it, their grip on the galaxy weakened. Back on the ship, Eli slumped into his seat, exhaustion written across his face. "You did good back there," he said, glancing at Fyeah. "So did you," she replied, a small smile tugging at her lips. "But we're not done, are we?" Eli shook his head. "Not even close. The syndicate's still out there, but now we have the upper hand." Fyeah nodded, her determination renewed. For the first time, she saw a glimmer of hope, not just for herself, but for Eli. Together, they had a chance to make things right, to fight back against the darkness that had haunted them both for so long. The final battle. The starship soared through the void, its hull scared but intact. Fyeah stared out the viewport, her mind racing with the weight of what they had accomplished and what lay ahead. The syndicate's central database was in Eli's hands now, but the data revealed more than either of them had expected. "They're planning something big," Eli said, his eyes scanning the decrypted files. His tone was grim. "A massive operation targeting multiple planets, including yours." Fyeah's heart sank. "My people are in danger." Eli nodded. "If we don't stop them, yes. The syndicate's got fleets and resources. This isn't just about taking down their leaders anymore. It's about saving lives." Fyeah squared her shoulders, determination etched into her features. "Then we stop them. Together." Eli looked at her, his expression softening. "You sure about this? It's going to be dangerous." "I'm not running away," Fyeah said firmly. "Not anymore." Their destination was the syndicate's fleet assembly point, a massive shipyard hidden deep in an uncharted nebula. The facility was heavily fortified, with dozens of warships in various stages of construction. It was a fortress in every sense, and the odds were stacked against them. Eli had a plan. "We can't take them head-on," he explained, pulling up a holographic map of the shipyard. "But if we can disable their power core and overload the reactor, we can destroy the entire operation in one strike." "And the warships?" Fyeah asked. "Still in dock," Eli replied. "We hit them before they launch." The plan was risky, but it was their only shot. They approached the nebula under the cover of its dense, swirling gases, slipping past patrols and automated defenses. Eli's years of experience navigating hostile territory were evident, but even he couldn't hide the tension in his movements. They landed on a maintenance platform near the shipyard's outer edge, donning disguises to blend in with the workers. Fyeah's alien features gave her some credibility, but Eli's human appearance drew suspicious glances. "Keep your head down," Eli whispered as they moved through the facility. "We don't want to attract attention." They reached the power core without incident, a massive chamber filled with humming machinery and glowing conduits. Eli immediately set to work planting explosives while Ela kept watch, her blaster at the ready. The minutes ticked by in agonizing silence. Just as Eli armed the final charge, an alarm blared, and the room was flooded with syndicate soldiers. They had been discovered. "Cover me," Eli shouted, diving behind a console as blaster fire erupted. Ela sprang into action, her shots precise and deadly. She moved with a confidence she hadn't known she possessed, protecting Eli as he scrambled to finish the job. But the syndicate forces were overwhelming, and their leader, a towering alien encased in battle armor, stepped into the chamber. "You again," the leader snarled, his voice dripping with disdain as he locked eyes with Eli. "You've been a thorn in our side for far too long." Eli stood, his weapon trained on the leader. "Funny. I was about to say the same thing." The battle was fierce, with Ela and Eli fighting side by side against the syndicate forces. The leader proved to be a formidable opponent, his armor deflecting most of their attacks. But Ela noticed something, a weak point in the plating near his shoulder. "Eli, his shoulder," she shouted, firing at the exposed area. Eli caught on immediately, his shots finding their mark. The leader roared in pain but continued his assault, his weapon blazing. Ela ducked behind a console, her mind racing as she searched for a way to end the fight. Then she saw it, a control panel connected to the power core's safety systems. If she could override it, the core would go critical immediately. But it meant putting herself in harm's way. "Keep him busy," she yelled to Eli, sprinting toward the console. "Eli, no," Eli shouted, but she was already moving. She reached the panel and began working, her fingers flying over the controls as blaster fire whizzed past her. The core's hum grew louder, and warning lights bathed the chamber in red. "Eli, we have to go," Eli shouted, taking down the last of the soldiers. "It's done," Ela cried, running toward him as the core began to overload. They sprinted through the corridors, the facility shaking violently as explosions ripped through its structure. The roar of the collapsing shipyard was deafening, but they didn't stop until they reached their ship. The engines roared to life, and they blasted away just as the facility erupted in a massive explosion. The shockwave sent their ship tumbling, but Eli regained control, guiding them to safety. In the quiet aftermath, Ela and Eli sat in the cockpit, exhaustion etched into their faces. The syndicate's fleet was gone, their operation destroyed, and the galaxy was a little safer. "You did good," Eli said, breaking the silence. "So did you," Ela replied, a small smile tugging at her lips. "But this isn't over, is it?" Eli shook his head. "There are always more battles to fight, but for now, we've won." Ela looked out at the stars, a sense of peace washing over her. She had come searching for a hero, and in the end, she had become one herself. Together, she and Eli had faced the darkness, and won. A new chapter. The ship glided through the tranquil void of space, far from the wreckage of the destroyed syndicate shipyard. Ela stared out at the stars, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. The galaxy felt larger than ever, yet somehow more manageable. The thought of her people, now safe from the syndicate's grasp, filled her with a quiet sense of pride. Eli Carter sat across from her, silent as he cleaned his weapon. His weathered hands moved with the precision of someone who had done this countless times, but his expression was distant. The man who had saved her years ago, who had carried the weight of his guilt for so long, seemed lighter now, though still burdened by scars that wouldn't easily fade. "You could come back with me," Ela said softly, breaking the silence. Eli didn't look up. "To your planet. I don't think your people need an old soldier hanging around." "They do," Ela insisted. "We all do. They'll see you as a hero." Eli shook his head, a faint smile on his lips. "I'm no hero, Ela. Heroes don't leave the people they care about behind." Ela frowned. "You didn't leave me behind. You saved me. Twice now. That's what matters." For a moment, Eli said nothing. Then he leaned back in his seat, letting out a weary sigh. Maybe, but I spent too many years running from the galaxy. I wouldn't even know how to live among people again. You'd learn, Isla said with a smile. You've already taught me so much. Eli chuckled, a sound that felt foreign in its warmth. You've got away with words, kid. When they arrived at Eula's homeworld, a crowd had gathered to greet them. Word of their victory had spread, and the people looked on in awe as the ship touched down. Eula stepped out first, her luminescent patterns glowing faintly in the soft light of the twin suns. The cheers of her people were deafening, but Fyeah's focus was on Eli as he emerged from the ship behind her. He stood stiffly, clearly uncomfortable with the attention, but Fyeah reached out and took his hand, giving him a reassuring smile. "This is Captain Eli Carter," she announced, her voice carrying over the crowd. "The man who saved me." And countless others. For a moment, there was silence. Then the crowd erupted into cheers, their voices a chorus of gratitude. Eli looked around, his expression a mixture of disbelief and humility. Eli leaned closer to him. "See, they need you." Eli shook his head, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Maybe, but I think they need you more." That evening, as the celebrations continued, Yilla found Eli sitting alone on a hill overlooking the city. She approached quietly, taking a seat beside him. "What now?" she asked. Eli stared out at the horizon, the twin moons casting a silvery glow over the landscape. "I'm not sure," he admitted. "I've spent so long running and fighting. I don't know how to stop." "Then don't stop," Isla said. "But maybe it's time to fight for something instead of against something." Eli looked at her, his expression softening. "You've got a good head on your shoulders, kid. You're gonna do great things." "So are you," Isla said, her voice firm, "whether you believe it or not." The next morning, Isla stood with her people as Eli prepared to leave. She felt a pang of sadness as she watched him board his ship, but she knew this wasn't goodbye. "You'll come back?" she asked, her voice carrying a hopeful note. Eli paused at the ramp, turning to face her. "If you ever need me, you know where to find me." Eli nodded, her heart heavy but hopeful. As the ship lifted off, she raised her hand in farewell, watching until it disappeared into the sky. She turned back to her people, determination burning in her chest. She had found her strength and her purpose. And though Eli was gone, his legacy would live on through her. Somewhere in the vast expanse of space, Eli Carter stared out at the stars. The galaxy was still full of dangers, but for the first time in years, he felt something he hadn't in a long time. Hope. His comms crackled to life, a distress signal cutting through the silence. Eli smirked, gripping the controls. "Guess it's time for one more fight." The ship turned toward the signal, and Eli Carter vanished into the stars. Still a soldier, but now, more than ever, a hero.